Okay, a little update on our progress here. I think since the last time, I've got the base on, put the motor in, I installed some new wire on the motor, new 12 gauge wire there, cleaned up these uprights, and got those bolted on. They're not tight yet, and we'll leave them like that. Our next step is to get the table up here, and I've got to wait till I have some. Once we get that table up, we've got the idlers, the bottom rollers in it, so we can get that up there, and then we can begin the more complicated stuff of putting all the gears together. So stay tuned. The next thing we have to do here is cut a gasket that fits the gearbox here. This is one side of it right here. This is the other side. So I'm using the other side to get a template because this side here has some locating pins in it. And I think what I'm going to do is go ahead, cut this out, mask it, tape it to the side of this, we'll flip it over, then I can kind of start cutting the holes in the inside. So let's go ahead and at least get the outside template done here. And I'm using an X-Acto knife here, an artist knife, and on my steel workbench. I think this should cut through okay, so we can get a pretty good template going here. So let's see what we can do. There. All right. We've got that. This bottom side here is square, so I use that as kind of my reference spot. I'm using 3/32 inch paper gasket material here, which I think is about as close as I could get to what was originally on here. I'm hoping by keeping this tape onto here, I can keep it nice and firm as I go around and cut out the inside, but also I should be able to feel where the holes are. Pull out the holes a little bit so I can then cut them out later. Okay, I've gone all the way around it, popped out the inside. The only place where we're a little thin is right here on the outside, but there's plenty of meat here that covers that bolt hole, so we should be good. So I think we're good to go. We've got our two gearbox gaskets done. Again, I think I'm just leaving the tape on that one, like I did the other one there, until we get ready to put those all together. I've pretty much got everything painted up, got all the parts cleaned. There's a couple of pieces yet to set the knives that I don't have, but I was pretty pleased that I was able to track down all new bearings for all the bearings that are in this thing. And I'll go ahead and post them in the description, the part numbers and whatnot that I found. These are for the planer Cutterhead. These are the thrust bearings that hold the pinion gear in the gearbox. There's two of those required. And these are the thrust bearings for the table raising mechanism. They're identical to what were on there. And I have a new seal for the gear engagement opening. And it's not exactly the same in that it's a little thinner. This is a 1/4 inch seal, and the original spec was 5/16, but I think it should work just fine. So I took these all to a bearing supplier and gave them the old numbers off the other one. They were able to track them down for me. Altogether, it was about 170 bucks, I think, and I believe these thrust bearings right here were the most expensive, if I'm not mistaken. I think they were like 30 bucks each. And the next thing I did also, I had some parts. When I took everything apart, these are the parts they're the adjusting nuts that are for the raising mechanism or to adjust the table, to fine adjustment the table. And there's an Acme thread in there, and then this thread goes into the supports on the table. And you can see this was pretty well busted. It still worked, and then this is the other one. And it was cracked right here. I don't know if you can see that crack right there. So I thought I'd just go ahead and replace those if I could. These also have a little hole in here that you can put probably a 1/4 inch piece of metal in there to turn these a little bit. So I was able to find, I contacted again Stine Gear. They're in Bessemer City, North Carolina. Great folks. They were very helpful. And I took some initial measurements, sent these down there. Well, he told me they could make them. So I sent him the originals. And I had to make a couple of modifications to them on these adjusting nuts. I had him take out these holes. I thought those just add to the, because they can only go to the bottom of the Acme threads there. So I said that's probably just weakens the casting a little bit. So let's leave the holes out. And then if I need to adjust it, I can just adjust it with a pair of slip joint pliers, right like that. And I also, you'll notice here, if you can see that the Acme threads only go about halfway down. They don't go all the way through this adjusting nut. And I thought that was a little odd. I went back and I looked at how they all went together and couldn't see why it had to be that way. So I had Stine Gear run the Acme threads all the way through. So those Acme threads are the full length and should give it a lot more stability. Okay, I was getting ready to put these are the bottom idler rollers. And I was getting ready to put these back together, and there's a fiber washer on each end of these things that you can see at least one of them was pretty well done for. And the spec said that they're 3/4 inch ID, 3/64 of an inch thick, an inch and 3/16 OD. And so I thought I might as well try to replace these rather than reuse them. So I went to Lowe's and I was looking for a nylon washer that would fit there. And this is all they had. And it's an inch OD, which is a little smaller. And it's just a smidgen thicker than 3/64. It's probably 10,000 to 15,000ths of an inch thicker than a 3/64. So what I thought I'd do, take my step drill, hold on to one of these things with my vice grips like that, and ream it out. There. So I'm able to get that over there. And these things ride right against that brass bushing right there. So I think we're going to be just right. And I have enough room to get the snap ring in there. I've already put one of these together. So the snap ring fits in there like it should. These can go in, and then that snap ring sits down, and we're going to be just fine. So that's how I fixed that little problem. Okay, this is our last one. We'll put that snap ring on there and get it seated in properly. There we go. Okay, I put a very light coat of grease on these shafts before I put them in the rollers, but I think that little solution for these wore out fiber washers is going to work just fine, because those snap rings set in there, set in the groove okay, and yeah, now that's in the groove there. Perfect. Yeah, so we're going to call that a fix. Now what I'm going to do before I put these in, I'm going to take some acetone and clean them off real good so there's not any, I've now got grease on my hands. So we'll go ahead and put those in the table. Okay, we've got our uprights on. I don't have them tightened down yet. I've still got a little bit of play there until I get some more stuff set. Next thing I'm going to do, I've got these bearings. These are the thrust bearings that I picked up. They're all in there, roll pins put in, so these are good to go. We'll go ahead and put the adjusting nuts on there. These are the ones I had made by Stine Gear. work great. And then these flanges that go over them to hold the table, we'll go ahead and put those on. There we go. Now we're ready to put the table on, but I'm going to need a little extra help for that. All right, we finally got the feed rollers with all the parts necessary to put them in. And one of the things that I was missing were these spring washers, these tension washers that go up against these plates here. And I was missing one completely when I took it apart. One of them that was in there, there's four, two on each roller. One of them was probably okay to use again. The other two were compressed such that they probably weren't doing their job anyway. And in addition to that, there's some fiber washers that go next to these as well. And I think I was missing two of those. So I was, after a lot of searching, I was able to find some of these wave washers that aren't exactly the same, but they're darn close. And I had to grind it out just a shade to make it fit. They're not quite as big, they're probably a couple thousands less on the OD. But anyway, long story short, I was able to find some fiber washers, and now I've got these wave washers. We're ready to put these things in there, and we'll go ahead and get these rollers ready to put in so that we can then tighten down the uprights on the planer. So these things go just like that. The wave washers compress against there, so we should be ready to go to put these in. Got the main front feed roller and then the out feed roller ready to go. I've got this gib taken out of here so I can tilt these back. I've taken the bolts out here so I can tilt this back a little bit, just enough to get this front feed roller in there. So that one's in, and then the out feed. Oops. And the out feed. All right, so we've got those set in there. Go ahead and get these bolts back in here to underneath to hold it. I'll still leave them a little bit loose while I'm finalizing this stuff, and we'll get ready to tighten things up here a bit. We have these guide blocks that now go in on either side like that to support the front, and I marked them as I took them off, so they're going to go back, and this one goes for the right front, this one's over here, and this one is over there to kind of keep that way. It'll keep the bearings matched up with the shafts that they came from. So I'm going to put a little teeny bit of grease in there, and we'll slide those in. That one's for that side in the back, and this one's for this side in the back. Okay, we're getting ready to put these guide blocks in that have the bushings for both the front feed roller and the rear out feed roller. And there's an O-ring that goes on the end of the shaft. And what I did is I bumped these bushings down there just a shade. I took a socket that fit in there, bumped them down just a touch so that that O-ring will sit down there a little bit better and hopefully seal that a little bit. When I took this apart, the O-rings were shot. There wasn't anything in them at all. So hopefully that'll make a little bit of a difference. As I mentioned earlier, I put just a little teeny bit of film of grease on there. So I think we've got those in about where they need to be. Okay, now we're ready to put, I put these, this is the last of these tension springs on the feed rollers, both in feed and out feed, that I got to put in. And what they do is they go up there like that, and then you got to compress them down to get them lined up straight. And the best way to do that, I've found, I've got a little small pry bar that I can just compress them a little bit and then push them onto that flat spot and then get them lined up the rest of the way. You can kind of see where they've got to go right there. Okay, you can see where I've got it started. Now I just need to push that over. Just push that over and get it lined up. And I just used a line-up tool to kind of get it over there. So we're just going to leave those where they are for the time being. And then there are the tension bolts go down. Those can go in a little bit later. So I've got all of those in now. That one over there. And then over on the gearbox side, they were actually a little easier to put in because the casting wasn't quite as deep. So I had a little more room to work here. So we got those in too. Now there are some 5/16 flat-headed screws that go in here, both top and bottom, that connect to those guide blocks that we put in earlier. This is what they originally looked like. And you can see there's screws. Some of them were pretty well worn actually. A couple of them like that one. That one was pretty well wore out. Plus, those were really hard to get to. So what I was able to do was I was able to source some of these Allen head recesses that'll replace those. And so we're going to go ahead and put those in right now, and I think they'll be a lot easier. The other reason for putting these Allen head screws in here, or Allen socket screws, is it's so much easier to get in here to tighten them and take them out. As you could imagine, it would be difficult to get a screwdriver in there and get them tight enough, as tight as they need to be. So this is going to work out all right. We're going to go ahead and put this is the magnetic starter switch that goes in here. When it came out, you might have seen in the other video, this was a mess because it had leaked. This gasket had blown and it leaked grease and oil on there for years. So I've cleaned it up as best I could. I think it came out all right. So we'll go ahead and get that started. I've already put in there's a couple little things that this sits on right there, so I've already put those in. Somebody had this out before, caused me a little bit of an issue here because they had put the wrong size screw in the top here and stripped out the threads. So I ran a tap through there. The thing sits on some little rubber grommets that are in there that isolates it from the housing. Let that snug down. Now the next thing we need to do is bring the wire up from the motor. Now I replaced the wiring that had been in there. It was probably okay, but it had been in there for goodness knows how long, so I decided to go ahead and replace that with some new fresh wire. And it sits in this flexible conduit. And it comes up through that hole there. We'll bring the new cord that I have up through the other side. Okay, we've got our switch in, got everything hooked up. I actually took some pictures, a couple pictures, but when I took this apart to remember where all the wires went. So we've got the wires from the plug coming in here, and wires from the motor, or to the motor coming in down here. I've got it plugged in, so let's give this thing the smoke test. Let's see what happens. There we go. All right. All right, I'm just putting on these guide bars that go on top of the planer bed here. Got them all cleaned up. And I'm using, again, I think I mentioned earlier, I found a bunch of 1/2-inch stainless steel truss head screws, bolts that I'm using in here. So we'll go ahead and fasten these up. Our next step, before we can get to the gearbox, we've got to assemble the cutter head, put the bearings on there, and put that in. These bearings go on just like that. And when I took the old ones off, I had to drive through here a little bit, and in doing so, I distorted these just a touch where they go around the edge there, you can see. So I've got this one fixed back so it fits on that little shoulder right there. And the way I did that, the way I fixed it, I put that socket in there like that. It's just a shade smaller than that hole. And I took a little screwdriver on my vise right here and just drove it back just a touch on those three places where I nicked it. And I got the first one back to where it fits. Let's see if I got this one back to where it needs to be. They have to fit on that little shoulder right there. Okay, got that one too. All right, so we're good. Now, what we'll do is go ahead and get these bearings on there. I don't have a press, so I've got to think about how I'm going to go about putting that on there. Now we're ready to slide this in through the gearbox here. Like that. There. Okay. All right, these are the new gears that I got from Stine gear. This is the old one. You can see it's wore pretty thin there. This is the old worm gear. Again, pretty much wore out there. There's probably a little bit of wear left on it. So we've got the new one on the assembly here with the new thrust bearing. I made darn sure that that snap ring got seated properly. And this is the assembly that goes on the end of the cutter head shaft. So we're going to go ahead and put that one on right now. Now, there's some parts here, but I wanted to make sure I got them back in the exact same order. So I spent some time, even took out a magnifying glass to make sure I could see which way the wear rings were on them. Okay, there's a fiber washer in there, and then I made sure that I had these things oriented properly. So that goes in like that. And then we've got to put the woodruff key that sits there. Okay, so that got the woodruff key in there. Now we're going to put that worm gear on there. I think that's where all that farther that goes in there, because it just comes up. This is a castle nut here, kind of, and it's got a little, and this on there pretty tight right now. So I think we'll be good to go on that. Now the next piece that goes in, and it goes over like that, and it comes up and meshes in with that. So we're going to go ahead and get it on there and tighten it up. What I've got to figure out now is how I'm going to set the backlash on this thing. Okay, I've got the dial caliper set up in here, and right now I've got about 12 to 13 thousandths of play there in terms of backlash, and the spec calls for between 8 and 10, so I'm going to adjust that up a little bit and we'll check it out. Okay, right now we're at 9, I'm going to say 9 thousandths, and that's about as close as I can get to between 8 and 10. So we're going to call that good. Okay, we're going to continue putting the gearbox together here. We're now putting, these are the gears that go on the outfeed roller. So let's go ahead and do those. First one goes on here like that. This side has a keyway in it. Then we've got the spacer that goes on like that. And then we've got this outside one that goes on like that. Now I think all I'm going to do is line this up. We've got the sprocket, this is the clutch sprocket that engages the feed, and so I've got to line this inside one up with that. Now I'm going to go ahead and set up the ones for the in-feed roller. And I believe that goes like that. This one has a shear pin in it. Okay, we've got our feed roller gears on. Had a little bit of difficulty getting the pin through here. It's a shear pin, and it needed to be cleaned up a little bit, but we got that in there. And then I used this one to line up here, so that's all lined up now. In terms of, I measured from the casing to the center of the tooth, and from the casing to the center of the tooth. That means this one should line up with that one, and it looks like it's pretty damn close. So we're going to call that good. We're going to go ahead and tighten down the set screws and start putting the chains on. Okay, we're pretty much done with the gearbox. We haven't put the shift lever, engagement lever in yet, but we've got all the sprockets, the gear set. Now, there's a gear on the back of this that meshes with that brass gear in here. That spec is 5 thousandths for backlash, and I've got way more than 5 thousandths in here, but that gear I did not have made, and so that's the old gear, and it had a little bit of wear in it. It's something that I can replace later, but I'm going to call it good for now. And then we went ahead, we got the sprockets on, the chains on. Now, I had a little bit, I thought that getting these sprockets on and putting chains on was going to be the easiest in the world, just like putting on a bicycle, right? Well, not so much. Got the back chain on fine, front chain would not go on. And when I took this apart, over here there's 2 sprockets. And I didn't make a note of which went on the front and which went on the back. And while I eyeballed them, they looked exactly the same before I put them on. But I had this one in the back and this one in the front, and this chain would not fit. And I messed around, finally thought the only thing that could be wrong is the sprockets, so I took them off, reversed them, and voila, here we go. All right, so what we've got to do now is we need to put the case on. So we need to get a little some Permatex and get our gaskets ready to go. Okay, we're ready to put the crankcase on here. These 4 studs, I put some Loctite on them and then put double nuts here to get them, so I can get them in good and tight. Then I took the masking tape off of the gasket here. Okay, next I'm going to put a little Permatex gasket seal on here and stick it on the main piece of the crankcase. All right, we've got the gearbox on there. We've got the shifter mechanism down in there. Over here. So that's engaged, that's out of gear. The rest of the bolts back in here. So we're going to take care of that, and then I'm going to fire it up and just see what happens before I put grease in it. Well, I'm about 90% complete. It's all put back together. I've still got a lot of some of the adjustments to do. I've got to put the knives in because I didn't have a gauge to set the knives, and I'm also missing a couple little springs that go in the cutter head. And that's fine because I'm going to have to take the cutter head back out anyway. I've got a little bit of a rub where one of the bearings meets a little shroud on the end of the cutter head. And I suspected that when I put it back together because I put the bearing in probably just a smidgen farther than what it needed to be. But other than that, things work okay. I don't have any grease in the gearbox yet, so we're going to take care of that tomorrow. For the most part, I'm calling this good. When I get it all adjusted and the knives in, I'll do another short video on how it all came together. But I'm pretty pleased with it so far. I think that's going to work real nice. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, like. If you have any questions about what went on with this and how I did some things, don't hesitate to comment. Love to hear from you, and I try to answer every single one. Thanks for watching, and take care.